The absolute audacity of someone ignoring an avoidant is enough to send their entire psychological framework into complete chaos. These are the people who built their identity around being the ones who withdraw, dismiss, and create distance, so when you flip the script and ignore them instead, they experience a level of offense and indignation that borders on the comical. How dare you use their own tactics against them? Don't you know they're supposed to be the ones in control of when and how contact happens? The ultimate role reversal rage. Avoidants are absolutely enraged when you ignore them because it completely destroys their carefully constructed power dynamic, where they get to control the emotional temperature and decide when interaction occurs. They've spent their entire relationship history being the ones who determine when people get access to them, so your silence feels like a hostile takeover of their psychological territory. Their offense comes from the realization that you're treating them exactly the way they've been treating others for years, and they absolutely hate how it feels to be on the receiving end of their own behavior. The person who perfected the art of emotional unavailability is suddenly experiencing what it's like to want someone's attention and not receive it. This role reversal is particularly offensive because it strips away their illusion of being special or different. If you can ignore them as easily as they ignore others, it suggests they're not as irresistible or psychologically superior as they believe themselves to be. The ego injury of being dismissed. Your ignore tactics inflict massive damage to their ego because being ignored suggests they're not important enough to warrant your attention. These are people who've built their self-worth around being pursued, desired, and constantly thought about by others, so your indifference feels like a direct attack on their sense of specialness. The offense they feel is proportional to how accustomed they are to being the center of attention in their relationships. They're used to people chasing them, analyzing their behavior, and trying to win their approval. Your complete disinterest suggests they might not be as fascinating or valuable as they thought. This ego injury is particularly painful because it forces them to confront the possibility that they were more dependent on your attention than they realized. If they don't care about people ignoring them, why does your silence bother them so much? The answer threatens their entire self-concept, the entitlement to your emotional labor. Avoidants feel offended when you ignore them because they've become entitled to your emotional availability and pursuit. They expect you to always be there, always respond, and always make effort to maintain connection, while they contribute minimal reciprocal energy to the relationship dynamic. Your silence violates their unspoken belief that they deserve unlimited access to your attention without having to provide equal investment in return. They've gotten comfortable with the one-sided dynamic where you do all the emotional work while they reap the benefits of being desired and pursued. The offense comes from their realization that you've stopped providing the free emotional labor they've become dependent on. They feel cheated out of something they never deserved but had learned to expect as their natural right in relationships. The loss of their primary validation source. Your ignore behavior cuts off their main supply of ego validation and emotional regulation. They didn't realize how much of their self-worth was dependent on your consistent attention and pursuit until that source was completely eliminated. The offense masks their panic about losing their primary source of feeling important and desired. Without your reactions to their behavior, they lose their ability to feel powerful and in control. Your responses to their hot and cold patterns were feeding their need to feel influential and significant. Your silence removes their ability to affect your emotional state, which makes them feel powerless and invisible. The offense is really displaced anxiety about their loss of psychological control and emotional supply. They're not just annoyed that you're ignoring them, they're terrified about what your indifference says about their actual importance in your life. The how dare you superiority complex. Avoidants feel offended when ignored because they believe their emotional unavailability gives them special status that should exempt them from being treated the way they treat others. They think their mysterious aloofness makes them too valuable to be ignored by people who should be grateful for any attention they provide. This superiority complex makes your ignore behavior feel like insubordination against the natural relationship hierarchy where they're supposed to be the prize that others compete for. Your indifference challenges their assumption that they're inherently more valuable than the people who pursue them. The offense reveals their belief that they deserve better treatment than they provide to others. They expect you to be patient with their unavailability while they're offended by yours, which exposes the fundamental selfishness underlying their relationship patterns. The panic about losing control. Your ignore tactics trigger massive offense because they represent a complete loss of control over the relationship dynamic. Avoidants need to feel like they're managing the emotional temperature and determining when connection occurs. Your silence means they can't predict or influence your behavior anymore. This loss of control feels threatening because their entire sense of safety in relationships comes from being able to regulate distance and intimacy according to their comfort level. When you stop responding to their emotional thermostat, they lose their ability to manage the relationship according to their psychological needs. The offense masks their terror about not knowing how to function in a dynamic where they're not in charge. They've never learned to participate in relationships as equals, only as the ones who hold power through emotional withholding. The cognitive dissonance crisis. Being ignored creates massive cognitive dissonance for avoidants because it contradicts their fundamental belief that they're irresistible and that people can't stay away from them. Your silence forces them to confront the possibility that they're not as magnetic or important as they assumed. This cognitive dissonance manifests as offense because it's easier to be angry about your behavior than to question their own self-perception. They'd rather believe you're being unreasonable than consider that maybe they're not as special as they thought. The dissonance between their self-image and your indifference creates psychological stress that they resolve by deciding you're the problem, rather than examining whether their assumptions about their own desirability might be flawed. The addiction withdrawal symptoms. Avoidants become offended when ignored because they're experiencing withdrawal from the emotional drug of being pursued and desired. They've become addicted to the feeling of being wanted without having to reciprocate, and your silence cuts off their supply of this psychological narcotic. The offense they feel is actually their addiction talking. They need you to chase them to feel valuable and important. Your ignore behavior forces them to confront how dependent they've become on external validation from people they claim not to need. This withdrawal creates genuine distress because they don't know how to feel good about themselves without someone pursuing them and making them feel special. Your silence removes their external source of self-worth and forces them to find it internally, which they're not equipped to do. The reality check they never asked for. Your ignore behavior delivers a brutal reality check about their actual importance and influence in your life. They're offended because your silence suggests they don't have the power over you they thought they had and that you're capable of being indifferent to their presence or absence. This reality check forces them to confront the truth that their emotional unavailability doesn't make them more valuable, it makes them irrelevant to people with healthy self-respect. Your ignore tactics prove that their manipulation strategies only work on people who allow them to work. The offense they feel about being ignored is really offense about losing their psychological superiority and discovering they're just as replaceable as everyone else they've ever dismissed or taken for granted.